I'm thinking about religion again, and I'm thinking about belief in mystical beings like gods and angels and demons and those kind of things, which as an atheist I have no truck with. But a lot of people do. It seems like the majority of people on the planet have some kind of belief in non-human spiritual entities of that kind. And I can fully understand that, I have to say, but I'm trying to make an effort to understand it, and I'm trying to find analogues in my own experience for those kinds of beliefs. Do I believe in anything of that nature? Is there any part of my cognition which seems to contain beliefs which are otherwise irrational? And the nearest I can come is something that's something to do with non-conscious processing. I've spoken about unconscious and non-conscious processing before in these videos, and I think about it a lot in other contexts. And what I'm finding is that when I'm talking about the unconscious, sometimes I talk about it in kind of psychoanalytic terms and think about it in psychoanalytic terms and use language associated with psychoanalysis. And other times I just talk about it in terms of what's sometimes called the cognitive unconscious, which is much more mechanistic, much less coloured by the kind of dramas that mark Freudian and, to a certain extent, Jungian psychoanalysis and then their understandings of the unconscious. But either way, whether I'm using a psychoanalytic or a cognitive unconscious, there are certain things which seem to mark that concept for me and make it quite strange in many ways. First thing is that this unconscious, I seem to be conceiving it as kind of singular and coherent. I'm not sure why, but I do, and I tend to use the words the unconscious as if there's one of them. And I know some neuroscience discourses tend to use terms like cognitive processes to try and alleviate that singularity. But it feels intuitively obvious to say the unconscious and to treat non-conscious processes, as I say, as if they were coherent. And moreover, that coherence seems to be oriented around a kind of embodiment, a kind of, what Mark Johnson calls the body in the mind, which is this idea that parts of our mental structure, mental frameworks, if you like, map themselves and cohere themselves around a metaphor of the body. I'm not sure if metaphor is the right word in this sense. That seems to be the shape of the unconscious. It seems to have it seems to be body shaped. And again, I'm not saying that. If I was asked what shape is the unconscious, I probably wouldn't say that. But I think, just in terms of listening to my own language and thinking through my own cognition, it seems to fall into that kind of shape. So it's kind of coherent body-shaped entity. Also, the unconscious, the cognitive or psychoanalytic unconscious, seems to have a particular relationship to lived experience, which is different to conscious experience. It lives in a slightly different world. I say that because all sensory data that I'm experiencing right now fully consciously began life as non-conscious processes. The field that I'm looking out on now, I can see that field and I can kind of consciously inhabit and be aware of that field. But all sorts of non-conscious things must have happened in my brain, let's say, prior to my becoming conscious of it. So all those prior sensory stimuli are part of this non-conscious, singular, coherent, embodied existence. And of course, lots of the things that start off as part of non-conscious processes, sensory information, never get to consciousness. I think that's how things like subliminal messages work, to the extent they do work, and how clinical conditions like blindsight operate. It's in some situations it's possible that information can be received by the brain, become part of the cognitive unconscious, let's say, and be responded to appropriately in certain situations, but never come to conscious awareness. So this singular coherent unconscious has a slightly different relationship to lived experience than my conscious awareness does. And I'm sure there's other things as well. It has different relationships to time, different relationships to memory, different relationships to emotional content, I suspect. So, and again, I'm just kind of doing a crude analysis of my own functioning. So this is the kind of things I can feel happening in me. So to this extent, I seem to have an irrational belief there, if that's the right word. I seem to believe in this singular entity that sort of walked through my life with me, but has a very different relationship to the world than I do. It's kind of like a zombie. I'm kind of like walking with a zombie. And I think that's the name of a famous film, actually. I think I'm walking around with this zombie. Again, if anyone said, do you believe there is a zombie that lives inside you and experiences the world for you and occasionally presents some of it to your consciousness, I would say no. But a lot of the language that I'm using, a lot of the concepts that I'm wielding, a lot of the intuitions that I'm working on seem to suggest that I do believe that on some level. I operate as if that's true. So just to cut back to where I originally started with this, given those things are the case, is that significantly different to believing in something like a god or an angel or a demon? I'm not sure, really. I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's certainly an ontological difference between the zombie that lives inside my head, if I can put it crudely, and other aspects of my experience. So if there were demons and there were gods and there were angels, they wouldn't have the same ontological structure as trees and other people and houses and all this kind of physical stuff I'm surrounded by. They would have that strange quasi-metaphorical, quasi-imaginary, poetic structure that zombies have. But this is the zombie I've just been talking about has. And to that extent, I guess I would have no problem in people believing in those gods and those angels and those demons, if that's all that they were. I think if they were considered to have different kinds of existences, different kinds of properties, then I think we'd need to look at those very closely.